Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to what has become, for many, many years, in fact, many decades, an institution at the ROMA conference. Can I ask how many of you are newly elected members of council? Fantastic. Welcome. Congratulations. I need to tell you a little bit about this panel. As I said, it's been around for decades. It has been part of the ROMA tradition, if you will, for a number of years. The purpose of the panel has always been to provide you with practical advice that you can take away today and put into practice when you return to your municipalities. It's really important to do. Let me begin by introducing the panel. And if you have been here in previous years, you will know that this is the same group of people. Beside me is Lynn Balfour. This is Lynn's 14th year on the panel. She is the Director of Education Development for the Ontario Building Officials Association. She's responsible for continuing education, but she has also been in administrative and enforcement of the building code. She has some 30 years experience at that. She is a former president of the Ontario Building Code Association and is a current member of the International Code Council. Beside Lynn is Sandra Weber, who is the Director of Planning for Huron County. She has degrees in urban and regional planning and development from Waterloo and rural planning and development from the University of Guelph. Many years' experience in planning issues in rural communities. She's the chair of the Ontario Professional Planners Institute Agriculture and Rural Affairs Working Group. She runs a beef, cow, and calf operation together with her husband and 3 teenagers near Belgrave in the municipality of Morris Turnbury. It's her 2nd year on the panel. Rob Walton has been on the panel 19 years. There's an error in the program, and I apologize for that. He is currently the General Manager of Operations for Brant County and the owner of RW Squared Engineering Limited. He's a professional engineer, 34 years experience, works on infrastructure projects, municipal public works and operations, and he's worked mainly for smaller municipalities and communities. He's a member of the Ontario Drinking Water Advisory Council up to 2016, and interestingly, he is about to begin as a trainer with the Walkerton Clean Water Centre. So if you are taking the Walkerton Clean Water Centre Standard of Care course soon, you may see Rob there as the instructor. And if you haven't booked that course, by the way, you need to do it sooner than later. Sid Vanderveen has been on the panel since 1992. This is his 28th year on the panel. He's a civil engineer, and he's almost retired as a drainage coordinator for the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and the Ministry of Rural Affairs. Sid is, simply put, Mr. Drainage. He is the most knowledgeable person in the province with respect to this. He brings incredible knowledge, so if you have drainage questions, today is the day to ask them. Far into the panel is Jody Johnson, and this is Jody's 6th year. She is a lawyer, and she was on Bay Street for several years, partner in a large firm, and she recently moved as senior legal counsel at Halton Region. What makes her career interesting, I think, is she has been a CAO of a small municipality in Northern Ontario. She was with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing in Sudbury as an advisor, and she is the mother of 2 teenagers. Ladies and gentlemen, that is your panel. If you're new, you have to say, well, who is Michael Smither? I've never heard of Michael Smither. This panel is named after Michael because of his contribution. He was the publisher and editor of Municipal World magazine for a number of years. He passed away in 2002, and his loss touched, frankly, a number of people in the municipal sector. It's fitting that his name be associated with this panel. He chaired it for over 35 years. He enjoyed it, he looked forward to it, and his advice was always practical and always well received. As with the minister's session and Nigel Belchamber introduced the rules, there are rules this morning. Some of them will sound familiar. We have both written questions and we have also 4 microphones available. And I encourage you, if you do have a question, to go to a microphone. These are often the most interesting parts of the session, and we get some surprises from time to time. Identify yourself and your office and your municipality. This is not an opportunity to make a speech. One question, no subparts. And it should be of general interest, not of local interest. And as Nigel said, the rules are subject to change, subject to my discretion. So we're going to start with some written questions that we've received, and thank you for putting questions in the box. Jody, why don't we start with you?
Thanks very much, Fred. And the oldest of my 2 teenagers is currently an apprentice with a farm equipment mechanic company. So he's visiting many of your municipalities doing mobile work right now. I'm learning a ton about what he does. I received questions that we've combined. There are 2 questions that lend themselves to the same answer. And the first question is, how can ROMA help small communities who are losing our one and only financial institution? And the other question was, how do you see municipalities partnering with community health providers across rural Ontario to ensure a united voice if the LHINs become so huge? And when we looked at those questions, they really do have the same answer. And I think squarely these questions fall within your role as members of council and as councils as a whole. I start with looking at Section 224 of the Municipal Act that lays out the role and responsibility of council. And the first item sets out that it's the role of council to represent the public and to consider the well-being and interests of the municipality. And these questions fall squarely within that role. I think a couple of things come to mind. First and foremost, you're all here. You're participating in ROMA, you're members of ROMA. Participate and stay on top of issues and positions that ROMA is taking on your behalf, and let your concerns be known through your representatives to the ROMA board. That advocacy and strength of position is really important. But in order to do that and know what your position and priorities are, one of the things that's very important for council at the start of a new council term is to identify your strategic priorities. And in carrying out your role under the Section 224 of the Municipal Act, you want to think about what those priorities are, because that will help you determine where you put your resources and where you're going to focus your attention, and think about the well-being of the municipality as you develop that plan early on in your term.
Thank you. Sid?
Fred, if I could just add
sure.
to that. The things that Jody was saying sort of build on the question that I received about how can you help rural Ontario with the need for affordable housing. And I think at the beginning of the council term is an opportunity to do some strategic planning, and housing should certainly be a part of that discussion. So I think it's about looking at what are the needs in your community, identifying priorities, what are the types of housing, is it rental housing, is it ownership, what the different types of housing, is it supportive housing, look at what the needs are in your community and do some strategic planning around that to identify your priorities and come up with some actions. And I think that will also put you in a good position for being part of the provincial discussion on that topic as well.
Good, thank you. Sid?
Thanks, Fred. So my first question is this. I'm a new council member, and our municipality seems to have an abundance of drainage issues. I feel like I'm out of my element. You're not alone. Do you have any advice? 4 things. First, if your municipality employs a drainage superintendent, lean on him or her for advice. From my experience in dealing with the superintendents across the province, they are a good, solid group of people and are very knowledgeable about drainage matters. So lean on your drainage superintendent. Second, inform yourself. There's some good information on various websites. One of the ones that I usually direct people to is the OMAFRA website, Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And if you're interested, it's www.ontario.ca/drainage, so fairly easy to get to. Third, educate yourself. There are a series of one-day courses that you can take through Ridgetown College that provide direction and advice to municipal clerks, treasurers, and council members. So it's something that you can also lean on to learn more about what your responsibilities are. And finally, don't overcommit. One of the things that I've experienced with new council members is they're overzealous in wanting to solve problems, and sometimes the best thing you can do is say, hey, this one's not ours. If it's a municipal drain or if it's a roadside drainage issue, it's yours. But some of the private drainage issues where they want you to get involved, the best thing you can do is say, here's the Drainage Act procedures. Beyond that, it's not ours. So again, even on that sort of thing, rely on your drainage superintendent for advice.
Sid, that advice in terms of sometimes the issue isn't the municipal issue, but you want to get involved. Best advice is pass it off to whoever is responsible for it. Try not to take on responsibilities that are not within your jurisdiction, not within your responsibility. Really good advice. Rob?
Can I add something in there too? Back in my days of consulting, I worked on municipal drains. I would suggest to the new councillors to get involved in the projects too. Go to some of the meetings, but go to the meeting, introduce you who you are, and then listen. Don't do anything else. Just be and see what's going on with the project, so that when it comes to you at council, you're not then scrambling to what the heck am I doing here and whatever. What are the needs of the residents? And you will have heard the whole story. Then I think that's something you can do.
That's good. Rob, do you have a question as well?
Yes. No name on this one, but it goes like this. Plastic agricultural waste is a big landfill problem. Any suggestions on how to tackle this? We need a provincial strategy. How? So I assume what they're talking about here is bale wrap and the like plastic that's associated with that. In the operations that I've been involved with, yes, this has reared itself many times. One of the big problems with material like this, there's really two problems with it. One is oftentimes when the municipality gets it, even if you have a producer that will take it, it's highly contaminated and is problematic for the producer. The other thing is that many of the industries that have popped up that will do things with this material, like make benches or plastic fence posts or other products like that, they come and they go. They don't seem to be sustainable in the long term. So that's the real question, is how do we as a province make these things sustainable in the long term? And you know, if this is going to be a product that's going to be out there for the long term, then let's work on making the product that comes to the collections be clean enough that the manufacturers can deal with it, and somehow work with the industries to get a sustainable industry there. And then there will be, and over the years that I worked on this, we had places that would take it and we didn't have places that would take it, and then you would have them, and it was like a yo-yo.
Good. Lynn?
Yeah, I've got a really a great question, and also there is no name on this one, so I'm not sure where it's coming from. But also, I'm a new councillor, and a local business owner has called me to complain that the CBO won't issue a building permit unless he provides a whole lot of drawings that just seem to me like it's overkill. Can council give a directive to issue the permit? That never happens. Yeah, no. So actually, it's a good opportunity to just reinforce, especially for the new councillors, to reinforce the role that council plays in the Building Code Act process. So under the Act, the council is required to administer and enforce the Building Code Act and the regs in your area of jurisdiction. In order to do that, your role is also to appoint a chief building official and inspectors in order to administer and enforce the Act and regs. Once you've done that, your role really ends. And what happens then is the CBO then now has a role under the Act to be qualified to do what they're doing, to enforce unbiased and practicalities, and to actually ensure that the buildings are, health and safety is mandated in your local jurisdiction. So one of the things to remember in this also is the CBO and the inspectors are basically enforcers, so they're much like an enforcement authority like the police. So a question to ask yourself is, if it was a police matter, would you interfere in a police matter? And I think your answer is going to be no.
I like to put it another way. I think that's really good advice. Once council appoints a chief building official or a clerk or a treasurer, these are called statutory officers. And once appointed, they get their job description from the province. And you as a council can't interfere with that. You have no ability to do it. And you are foolish if you are a council trying to interfere with building officials. That's safety. At the bottom line, that's safety. Be really careful. I had a conversation with a couple of members of council after during the conference, and there was some confusion because they thought they heard at a session that if you get your agenda on Friday night and you see that you have a pecuniary interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, what you should do is contact the clerk and advise the clerk right away. And the question was, is that all I have to do? Well, no. You are required to verbally state your pecuniary interest and the general nature of it at the meeting, at the beginning of the meeting. That's number one, and that's always been the case. What's new is that you must also do it in writing. And here's the best advice I can give you. Write it out in advance or type it out, take it to the meeting and read it. And when it's read, the clerk will record it into the minutes. Give that written copy to the clerk. Why is that important? Because both the verbal and the written are going on a registry, which is going to be on your website. People are going to be paying attention to whether the written and the verbal were the same. Make them the same. Make sure you comply. Missing any one of those steps is a breach of the Act. Be really cautious about how you do it. Do we have another question? Jody, you have one?
I do. And Fred, that's really good advice. And I think the other thing I've heard is members who sometimes come to the meeting and ask the clerk, record the interest like my usual interest or like I did last time, and make sure that it is your interest each and every time for each and every specific agenda item. That's your words, not the clerk's words. I had a question about new policies. The question is, I understand there are several policies that have to be put in place by March 1st of this year, and what are they? And this, you can have a look at Section 270 of the Municipal Act, and currently there are 6 policies that are required to be in place that your municipality would already or should already have, being policies about the sale and other disposition of land, the hiring of employees, procurement of goods and services, notice, accountability and transparency, and the delegation of powers and duties. There are 3 policies that are being added. If you have not yet seen a report about these policies, it's something you should be looking for very soon and having a conversation with your staff about. And these policies are establishing a relationship between members of council and the officers and employees of the municipality. We sometimes hear people call this the council staff relations policy, but look carefully at the words. It is governing the relationship between members of council. So that's a little bit of a nuanced difference, but have a look and have some discussions in your municipality if you haven't seen a report about this policy yet. The other policy you need to have in place is a policy for pregnancy and parental leaves for members of council. So you want that in place. And lastly, you need to put a policy in place that governs the manner in which the municipality will protect and enhance tree canopy and natural vegetation. And this may tie into something you already have in your official plan or your planning documents, but you do need to have a council policy for these specific items. So have a look at that. If you haven't yet seen it, that's a follow-up homework item for you to take back to your municipality.
Let me just add one thing. The policy between members of council and staff is going to identify the issue of micromanagement, members of council wanting to get in and manage day-to-day. That's going to become a breach of your code of conduct. You need to be really cautious about doing that, and it's going to be, I think, very clear for municipal councillors going forward that that is not appropriate conduct, and we're going to see some issues come up around that very, very quickly. Sid, do you have another question?
Yeah, I do. So the question is, so you're retiring. All the best in the future and all that stuff. But who's the new drainage guy that we deal with now? It kind of sounds like don't let the door hit your butt on the way out. And I might have been offended, except I wrote this question myself, so I could only blame myself. And part of the reason I'm writing a question is because you guys won't go to the mic. So I encourage you to. Anyways, the new drainage program coordinator with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs is a fellow by the name of Tim Brook. And he's grew up on a farm, and he's got an engineering background, and I've been working with him on drainage items, and so he's pretty knowledgeable. His email address, if you need to have that information, is timothy.brook, no S at the end, at ontario.ca, and he'll love this. His telephone number is 519-766-3651.
Who said we don't give practical advice? Rob, do you have another one?
Yes, Fred. This question's on asset management. When will all this work on our asset management plan benefit our residents? Well, first I'm going to start out with talking about the homework that you have to do in the next short period of time. So by July 1st of 2019, you have to pass an asset management policy. And that will eventually need to be renewed every 5 years. It's supposed to align with your water and wastewater plans and all the other plans that you have. There's a lot of stuff here that has to dovetail together for sure. And then by July 1st, 2021, you have to update your asset management plan for all of your core infrastructure, and then by July 21st, 2023 for all other assets. So asset management really has been around for a long time. We're putting it in new and fancy fancier formats now. I think the answer to the question is, when is it going to benefit the residents? It's going to benefit your residents when you as council start making decisions based on the information you have in front of you and decide whether these assets are part of your core assets and whether you should be maintaining them and whether they should go on. You know, if you've got, for example, a very low volume road with a very expensive bridge on it, can you keep that thing going forever? You know, a lot of these assets were built in the days of federal and provincial grants, which were promoting things like development and you know, times when people didn't have work and whatever. We're in a different time now. Are all those things sustainable? So I think that's really the answer. And I think there's some municipalities that are really starting to get this, and there's some that have a ways to go on it.
Yeah, that's true. Good advice. Sandra?
Yeah. One other question that dealt with streamlining of the planning process and what are some things that can be done. And I think streamlining processes has been a big part of the discussions over the conference for the last few days, and people are working on that at many different levels. But I think sort of three key things for me on the planning side of things is that a good pre-consultation meeting with developers in advance of their application. So with developers and planners and key municipal staff, being engineers or building officials or your ECDEV staff, just to clearly lay out what the process, the timeframes, and the study requirements are. That goes a long way to having a development or application move smoothly through the process. And a couple of other things, just looking at taking a good look at study requirements, what's required, what maybe could be waived or scoped in some way to reflect the scale of the development, and making sure that everyone's clear on that. And the last one is something that we're doing in Huron County is the planners are following up with the applicants, the developers, at the end of the process, just to talk about what went well, what maybe didn't go well, and what improvements can we make to that process moving forward. So those are some of the key things that I thought about for that question. Thanks.
Good, thank you. Let's go to the microphones. Microphone number 1.
Peter McLaren, councillor for Lanark County, the maple syrup capital of Ontario. This question is for Sid, being a fifth-generation farmer. As you're probably aware, the CAs are not mandated, but asked by Conservation Ontario to acquire the smaller wetlands above the 1 hectare in size, which no such thing as smaller wetland than that. And you coincide with that with the extreme increase in farm prices and, well, for my own situation, doubling of assessment on the farmland. It's now only 50% of residential. And I'm just wondering, with the advent of controlled drainage, if some of the CAs might take a look at that as being an option, because as we all know, those small wetlands or the low corner of the field or whatever that needs some drainage that maybe hasn't been done yet. And we have seen a lot of land cleared, which is all wetland to start with in the last, 5 to 10 years or so. And I'm just wondering, controlled drainage, it's very new. CAs aren't aware of it. And I should add that our local CA, I think, is the only one in the province that has made that step.
Thank you for the question, and there's a couple of elements here. So there's two types of controlled drainage. Number one, there's private controlled drainage that's on the agricultural land itself, and that is something that's taking off. There is some limitations in terms of topography. It works best when you've got really flat land, and it's trying to control the water that's in the tile drainage systems itself so that you can retain some of the water on the landscape. They're doing a research project, Sandra, over in Huron County, where they're doing some contour drainage. And so put in the tile flatter so you can actually control more water, and we'll see how that goes as well. So those are both private controlled drainage systems, and I think there's some opportunity there, understanding the limitations. The other type of controlled drainage is actually in your municipal drains itself, and this is something that's been going on for about 20 years. In some parts of the province, they've realized that, hey, land that we've drained years ago really isn't being effectively used, and maybe we should be holding back water and trying to recreate or enhance wetlands and storage areas on the landscape where it makes sense in partnership with the property owners. So there's opportunities there as well. Really, when it comes to some of this stuff, our limitation is our imagination, and I encourage people to get creative, and I applaud you for thinking that way.
For your work over the years. It's not a supplement, it's just a thanks of Sid's immense knowledge.
Well done, thank you. Microphone number 2.
Gordon Cuthbertson, I'm a councillor with the municipality of Nebing. I'm also a chief building official in 3 small municipalities. Nebing's not one of them. And my question is for Lynn. What can OBOA do to train for CBOs in the north remote areas where they are so small they cannot afford to send somebody to southern Ontario for training, and we also don't have internet, so webbing is not a good thing either. I tried to retire when I was 65. I tried to retire when I'm 70. I'm now hoping to be retired by 75 if you can find me a replacement.
Thanks for that, Gord. Actually, it's not a simple question to answer. It's going to be a question. It's going to be an issue pretty much across the north, and actually it's going to be an issue everywhere. We're entering the demographics where so many people are retiring, and what OBOA is trying to do right now is actually to promote our profession to try and attract new and younger people into it, and gain some knowledge of what we do, because half of our problem is nobody knows what we do. But what some of the things we're doing is just trying to promote the profession, promote more young people into it, and encourage people to come in and see what we do and do what we do. There's no simple answer, and we're just trying to move forward on some of these issues.
And keep in mind, 80 is the new 60.
There you go.
Microphone number 3.
Good morning, Dave Mennel. I am the mayor of the township of Malahide and councillor of County of Elgin. My question is a legal question to Jody, and this is on Bill 68. We've had some preliminary discussions on this, and we kind of got trapped in the council-staff relationship, which tells us how to play nice in the sandbox, and we've had a couple of councillors saying, well, what happens if we don't pass this? I know it's mandatory by March 1st, but what is the consequences if we do not pass one or all these sections?
That's a great question, and there, again, no simple answer to that. In terms of, is someone going to, come and, put a sign on your door and bar you from anything? I don't think that's likely to be the case, but the Municipal Act does require the policies to be in place. And when you were elected and you were sworn into office, you took an oath of office, and you also have obligations set out in the Municipal Act. So there are responsibilities that you did undertake to uphold. So you want to think about that. I appreciate it does sometimes take time to work through issues and develop a policy that council is happy with and wants to put into place. If you don't make it on March 1st, I encourage you to try to do so, but if you can't, I urge you to continue working through it. If you need any assistance, perhaps look out for some of your local resources, maybe talk to some of your neighbors, talk to advisors to your municipality that may be able to help you if you need some assistance in working through putting a policy to paper. It doesn't need necessarily to be a large and elaborate policy. We aren't looking at a 20-page policy document. It can be a very straightforward set of points and principles governing that relationship. So think about what will work for you to have something in place at the deadline or as very much soon as possible after that deadline. And keep in mind your obligations under the Municipal Act and in your oath of office.
Microphone number 1.
Thank you very much. Pat Sayo, Mayor of the Township of Edwardsburg Cardinal, County of Leeds and Grenville. I'd like to ask this question to whoever can claim to be the biggest expert on the changes to the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and the question arises out of a report that I had from a session yesterday. It wasn't actually at the session, but this is the report. Can someone clarify for me what my obligation is to declare a conflict of interest, a pecuniary interest, if there's something on the agenda that deals with a publicly traded company in which I own 1,000 shares out of the 70,000 or 70 million issued?
Let me take a stab at that. We had a councillor in Sudbury years ago who owned some shares in CPR, and he was convinced he always had to declare pecuniary interest when CPR issues came before council in Sudbury, and I assured him that that wasn't the case. If you have a controlling interest in a publicly traded company, you have an issue. Controlling interest means 10%. He would have had to have 10% of the shares of CPR, and then the question arises is, what's he doing on council in Sudbury? So that's the test, and that's a very different test than if it's a private company. If it's Fred Dean Widgets Limited, if I'm a shareholder or an officer of that corporation, that's a pecuniary interest that has to be declared. So public companies and private companies are a very, very different description in the Act itself. Microphone number 3.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Lynn Campbell. I'm the Ward 5 Councillor for the Township of Brock. And I was thinking that perhaps Sandra or Jody might want to weigh in on my question. My question is about Section 37, which of course can be used by municipalities to receive funding from developers for community projects, most often attached to a rezoning bylaw. My question is, how widespread is Section 37 in Ontario, and under what circumstances would you recommend it? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. In terms of Section 37, if you're not familiar, it's also sometimes known as the bonusing provision of the Municipal Act to permit additional height or density with an application that comes along. First and foremost, most important thing to keep in mind and recognize is you have to have policies in your official plan that would permit this. And Sandra may want to jump in on that at all, but you need to have that policy framework in your official plan. In terms of how widespread, I don't have a scientific study in front of me, but it's certainly not uncommon. It's certainly something that I've seen, particularly in municipalities that are growing municipalities that are experiencing, whether it's infill pressure or development pressure, to help have another tool available at the disposal of council. But you want to have the appropriate policy framework in place, not just in your OP, but also within your council to determine when and if you want to use that tool that you have available.
There's no one at the microphone right now. Let me take another question that I heard. Again, somebody was talking to me. This is another person that was talking to me. He said, we have to have an integrity commissioner in place for our code of conduct. I can get advice from the integrity commissioner. Can I just phone up and ask a question and get an answer? I hope not. And you hope not too. And here's why. The legislation says that the integrity commissioner will give you advice, but you have to ask for it in writing, and that's advice on your code and advice on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. So you have to ask for it in writing, and you will get an answer in writing. And here's the good news. If it's conflict of interest and you end up in court, you are entitled to rely on that opinion that you received from the integrity commissioner if you were complete in the details that you provided the integrity commissioner. If you left some things out, you may not be able to rely upon it. But integrity commissioners, in my experience, are going to be very reluctant to answer quick questions, particularly about conflict of interest over the telephone or in a one-on-one conversation. They will want it in writing, and more importantly, you will want it in writing. It's going to be really important. Are there any other written questions that we have? Rob?
Yes, this is on minimum maintenance standards for roads. So what are the implications of the May 2018 changes to the minimum maintenance standards? So for the new councillors in here, minimum maintenance standards are can be used as a defense for a municipality when lawsuits against you for maintenance of your roads and or lack thereof. In May 2018, there were 3 main changes made to the legislation. First was they've introduced a significant weather event, which a municipality can declare. There's a process you have to go through, and it does alter what your standards you have to do. You have to monitor the situation during that weather event, and then you have to go back to minimum maintenance standards as soon as the weather event is declared to be over. Sidewalks now come under minimum maintenance standards, and bicycle lanes now come under minimum maintenance standards. I'm sure that there were sessions here, and there will be at OGRA, that will go spend half the day going over these things. But I think these are important changes. I wouldn't rely on the significant weather event, though, to get yourself out of doing things, because if it doesn't turn out to be that it actually happens, which happens more often than not, and you didn't apply any resources, I think you'll be in trouble anyway. So that's my only advice.
Microphone number 3.
Thank you. Just a comment on that last statement. I wish they would get rid of the word minimum, because then the public perception is we're doing the absolute minimum. So anyway, my question regards the building code. There seems to be a flavor in the provincial government that we may lose our Ontario building code and go to the national building code. Could you comment on that and what the standards would be in terms of a comparison between the two, and whether the national building code is not as stringent? Could you just give us a comparison on that, please?
Okay, I'll try and give a little bit of what I know, because I'm probably about in the same situation you're in, hearing a lot of comments back and forth of what's going on. I believe there was actually a new building code that was somewhat ready to be issued prior to the change in government that we had, and obviously there may have been some change of approach to some of the issues around the building code, when they had the change of government. So with reflection to if it's going to the national, we've heard rumors the same as yours. The national building code is almost identical to the Ontario building code. There are some subtle changes. Obviously, the Ontario building code, we had some different political priorities in the last couple of years, so we have some things in our code that aren't necessarily in the national building code. But I would anticipate if they are going to go in that direction, that they will find some way to ensure that it's not going to be any lesser standard than you have now, and they'll try and coordinate and put together a package of code requirements that are going to be complement each other and make sure the minimum standards of health and safety are still maintained in our province.
Good. Microphone number 1, can you make it really quick? We're almost out of time.
I will. My question is for you, Fred, or possibly Jody Johnson. My question is related to the new legislation regarding public access to the Integrity Commissioner and the financial impact on small municipalities where the public is often most engaged. Even when an IC refuses to proceed with a complaint that is frivolous or vexatious, there will be costs at that point. What is your advice for municipalities to proactively address the potential costs when many people in the public may access the Integrity Commissioner?
Good question. I think your focus is wrong. I think your focus, and we heard it at the minister's session, what about frivolous and vexatious? It's going to cost us money. That's not going to cost you the money. What's going to cost you the money is bad behavior by members of council. Get that straight. That means there's an obligation on every one of you as members of council to behave appropriately, treat people in a civil way, to not micromanage your staff. Incivility is a big issue. In some places, it's not in others. This is a really important question. Frivolous and vexatious, and I've done this, doesn't take long and it doesn't take a lot of money. But bad behavior by a member of council takes time to investigate. That's where your real focus is. Understand this, the Act requires that the Integrity Commissioner educate not only you and your local boards, but also the public. So there's going to be greater awareness. You're absolutely right. Get the training, what's appropriate conduct. Don't get excited about frivolous and vexatious, get more excited about appropriate conduct. In my opinion, that's important. I want to finish this off because we're down to just over a minute. I want to tell you this is a special moment for me. I joined this panel in the early 1980s, hard to believe. And I took over as chair in 2002 when Michael Smither passed away. This is the highlight of the year for me. This is my best gig every single year. I love doing this. I love the questions, I love the impact. And the strength of this is in the members of the panel. These are great people, and they have been ever since I've been on it. I have to tell you, this is my last question box panel. I'm not going to be back next year, but I am pleased to tell you that the panel will be chaired next year by Jody Johnson. Congratulations. So I want to thank you, and I want to thank ROMA in particular for the support over the years. This, I think, is an important event, and it's a fun event. Thank you for your attention this morning. Thank you.